I can't think of the Beatitudes without also mentally quoting that great theologian Monty Python. Of course, the Monty Python did the immortal life of Brian. And for those of you who don't have an obsession with British comedy, I'll give you a short synopsis. Brian is at the Sermon on the Mount, which looks a lot like an overcrowded picnic, or perhaps a version of Lilith Fair with a lot more men. Seated in the back, the people can't hear very well, and they start talking among themselves, complaining about one another, and trying to fill in the blanks based on the few things they can hear. My favorite line is when one says that Jesus said, "Blessed are the cheese makers." When someone quite reasonably asks why cheese makers are so special, the theologian in the crowd states pompously, well, obviously, it's not supposed to be taken literally. It refers to any manufacturer of dairy products. Of course, had they stopped talking and complaining, they could have heard what Jesus was saying. They were so busy talking about each other, about what they thought they knew, and being irritated at one another that they heard nothing but their own noise. Ironically, life imitated art. When it first came out in 1979, there were huge anti-Python rallies and letter-writing campaigns about how they were making fun of Jesus, when most of the complaints came from people who had never seen the film. John Cleese, one of the writers, had pointed out that when they started to write the script, they found that there was nothing about Jesus that merited satire. The Reverend Professor Malcolm Burridge, the professor of biblical interpretation at King's College, wrote, "What they did do was take an ordinary British people and transpose them into a historical setting and did a great satire on closed minds and people who follow blindly. Then you have them splitting into factions. It is a wonderful satire on the way that Jesus' own teaching has been used to persecute others. They were satirizing closed minds. They were satirizing fundamentalism and persecution of others, and at the same time saying the one person who rises above all this was Jesus, which I think is remarkable, and I think the church missed that at the time. Most of us do assume that we know more than we do, and that whatever we are doing is right. People made assumptions about what the life of Brian was about and started protesting rather than investigating it for themselves. They talked to and listened to other people who agreed with them, who had not seen the movie either, but that way they had no reason to doubt their beliefs. Those who disagreed with them were obviously wrong and sinful. Once a learned professor went to a Buddhist monk wanting to know about Zen. The monk brought him in for tea and started to pour the tea into his cup, overflowing the cup, then the saucer, then the table, and then onto his pants. Finally, the professor told him to stop. Nothing more could get in. The monk said sadly, "You are like this cup, full of your own opinions and speculations. Come back to me when you have room to learn." Come back to the Beatitudes with a beginner's mind. Try to listen as though it were the first time. Try to hear it with the people who were on the hill that day. We unconsciously think of people much like ourselves when we imagine that crowd. But as Paul points out in Corinthians, the majority of the people on that hill weren't learned, weren't rich, weren't powerful. They were at best working class people who spent most of their time very close to the poverty line. Jesus spoke to the world his audience knew. They were familiar with hunger and thirst, with persecution from the Romans, and from those with power more than they. They understood what it meant to mourn. They didn't come to that hillside comfortable with their lives, but knowing that they needed God. They wouldn't have left their homes to follow a strange prophet if they hadn't. God chose what is low and despised in the world, things that are not, to reduce to nothing things that are, so that no one might boast in the presence of God. It is a mistake to look at the Beatitudes from the comfort of our homes and see them as merely consolation. They are also a call to action, as Carolyn Lewis points out in her blog on workingpreacher.org. They call us to question how we are living our faith and how we can live it better. Being poor in spirit in the Street Bible is described as people who don't think too much of themselves, who know their life is a mess. Mark 2:17 says that only the sick are in need of a doctor. Luke's version of the Beatitudes starts with, "Blessed are the poor," rather than the poor in spirit. It may be that Matthew reflects on the poverty of kindness rather than just the poverty of things. Recently, we've heard people saying that we don't have the luxury to care for the needs of others, that we need to think of ourselves first. Some say that poverty is a choice, and if those people tried hard enough, they wouldn't need help from others. Being merciful is all well and good, but we have to use common sense. If we help everyone, well, there just won't be enough to go around. The Journal of Philanthropy points out that those who make the least give the largest percentage of their income to charity. The more things you have, the harder it can become to let go of them. No matter how much money, property, followers, or celebrity, it's never enough. Because they continually worry about their own prestige, they cannot allow themselves to see how poor in spirit they really are. Perhaps being poor of spirit comes from thinking that the riches come from my own effort and not from God. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. In Jesus' time, they believed that bad things happened because some sort of especially sinful behavior. If you remember in John 9:2, the disciples asked Jesus, "Who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" We still have this mindset at times, feeling that perhaps the homeless man on the corner is choosing to beg rather than to get a job. What if he uses the money to get drunk rather than to get food? Is it better to have some institution, i.e. not me, help him, someone who will know better what he needs? Jesus tells us that we are to clothe the naked, feed the hungry, and doesn't really mention anything about doing it only for people who deserve mercy. We are called to compassion, not to judgment. Mercy blesses the giver as much as the receiver. We hear blessed are the meek and think that it means people who don't stand up for themselves, who don't make waves. But this is actually a modern version of the word. According to Ellicott's commentary, meek refers to someone who has their passion of resentment under control and are therefore tranquil and untroubled. They will inherit the earth because their contentment allows them to value and appreciate what they have. They care for others and do not become consumed with envy or resentment. Meekness is essential for gratitude, for empathy, and for building the kingdom of heaven. Meekness is not acceptance of injustice, but the ability to work for peace and justice, knowing that the struggle will be tough. There was a time when the church was very powerful, in the time when the early Christians rejoiced at being deemed worthy to suffer for what they believed. In those days, the church was not merely a thermometer that recorded the ideas and principles of popular opinion. It was a thermostat that transformed the mores of society. If today's church does not recapture the sacrificial spirit of the early church, it will lose its authenticity, forfeit the loyalty of millions, and be dismissed as an irrelevant social club with no meaning. Martin Luther King Jr. letter from a Birmingham jail. Sit on the hill with Jesus and hear his call to action. Rather than becoming bitter about how long and hard the journey, meekness allows us to take the difficult times knowing that God is with us and that he will give us the strength to continue the struggle.